Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deborah Smith, and I am the co-chair of the AAERG. You are here today for the second installment of the Black History Speaker Series. Today, we have a speaker of Mr. James Lee. James joined Berkeley Lab in 1998 and has spent the last 25 plus years supporting science in various information technology roles as a computer systems engineer. James has a broad scope of expertise in planning and managing technical projects, implementing and managing technology infrastructure, troubleshooting, and systems administration. He currently leads the Computing Sciences IT group, which provides dedicated support for a range of technology systems and services in the lab's computing sciences area. But first, a short video on Black inventors and innovations. Ladies and gentlemen, I now present to you James Lee, Computer Systems Engineer at Berkeley Lab.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you to the steering committee for inviting me to speak today and for everyone for attending. So I've been at the lab for about 25 years now, a little bit more than that, and I want to talk today about what brought me here and kind of how my journey has been and some of the things I've learned along the way. So one of the things that brought me here was chance. There's also an element of outreach and someone taking an interest in me. The bottom line, though, is that I didn't get here on my own. I didn't even plan to come here. I had been working at UC Davis, and a friend of mine mentioned that there was an open house happening and invited me to come check it out with him. So I did, and I attended two talks, one by William McCurdy, who was the head of information technology at the time, and he spoke about the future of computing and Moore's law. And I was working in a distributed computing group at UC Davis, and definitely always had an interest in computing, and so that piqued my interest. Then I saw a talk by Dr. Perlmutter, who did some research and won a Nobel Prize for that research about the expansion of the universe and how it's accelerating. And I've always had an interest in astrophysics as well, and so two of my favorite things kind of piqued my interest, and I ended up realizing also that he had talked a lot about how supercomputing had played a big role in his research, and I started to recognize that computing is becoming increasingly integral to science. And so two of my favorite things, computing and science, couldn't resist. And I ended up applying to a job in NERSC, the scientific computing center that we have here. Didn't get the job though, and I was okay with that. I was pretty happy with what I was doing at UC Davis. But as I was interviewing for the job, and NERSC was pretty rigorous, I think I interviewed with 6 different sets of people and gave a presentation. I had met with a gentleman named William Harris, who actually called me back a couple weeks after my interview and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And I want to take a moment and recognize his impact in shaping my life and career, because he basically twisted my arm. I told him, it was okay. I was happy. I didn't need to, I would have liked the job, but I didn't need to come. I was okay with what I was doing. And he said, "You're a big fish in a small pond and you need to expand your horizons." And I scoffed at that a little bit, but took a few minutes to think about it and recognize that I was getting some good advice and I should pay attention. And so he brought me down here, and I joined his group, which is Computer Operations and Network Support. And he was expanding that group so that it included not just monitoring the supercomputers and the energy sciences network, but also to workstation support and system administration. So he brought me in to kind of help with expanding the role of the group. And I started in 1998, and I didn't know it at the time, but he had an agreement with another group leader in the storage group to promote me into a position there if I did well. Apparently I did, and that happened, and I started working in storage about a year later, really enjoyed it. And then I had a chance, after talking to a friend who was working in IT division, to join a group that was running the lab's central email systems and directory and calendar systems. And so I decided to take advantage of that to do something a little different. And I had some experience in managing some of those systems at UC Davis, and was looking forward to getting back into that. A couple years later, my boss named me team lead, and that kind of started my leadership experience. And I really appreciated that, and started to learn how to grow myself a little bit. Unfortunately, in 2011, I was laid off, and that was a tough time for me, but I got past it and ended up back at the lab in 2012 in computing sciences. And I was the position was a team lead position, and we were focused at that time on CRD because computing science was a little bit smaller than it has grown to be now. But it was a good opportunity to get back into the lab and continue my journey here. Last year, I was promoted to group lead and have been leading a group to support all of computing sciences in general, and try to kind of bring a little more cohesive approach. We have 4 divisions in computing sciences, and so it can be a little chaotic at times because different groups and different divisions have different ways of doing things. And so one of my goals is to centralize and standardize our operations a little bit. So the path was a little bit rocky to get here. I did have some setbacks. Like I said, when I got laid off, that was a little bit tough. My father, though, had always had a spirit of perseverance. He wanted to fly when he was young, and the only way he could do that as a young Black man in the early 60s was to go through the Air Force. And he was one of 5 Black men that enrolled in his pilot training course at the time. He was the only one who made it through. And he said it really felt like a lot of people were working against all of them. And he said it was the hardest thing ever to weather all of that and even deal psychologically with the fact that people were kind of working against him and didn't want him to be there. But he drilled into my head and my sister's head, if first you don't succeed, try again. It's cliche, but it was a valuable thing. And I've tried to impart that to my daughter as well. So when I was laid off, I took it pretty hard, and I was speaking with a coworker who pointed out that yes, it's a setback, but that I should consider looking at it instead as an opportunity and to start charting my course forward after that. So I want to thank my dad for his inspiration and being a role model for perseverance. He was laid off, in fact, 3 times during his career as a pilot, but he thoroughly enjoyed his career and he did do his dream job. And then also to Howard Walter, who was the coworker who kind of gave me a little chin up when I had gotten laid off and was down about it. So I want to talk a little bit about my professional growth. Excuse me, I kind of think of it as how I've evolved through my career and time here. Originally, I was focusing on technical competency, making sure I knew what I was doing and did a pretty good job of it. And then I started focusing on learning how to work with others and develop a little bit of network. And I also recognized that I should start thinking not in terms of just transactions and kind of one-off collaboration with people, but also developing relationships. And I similarly had an epiphany that I should not just focus on building networks, but on becoming part of the community and learning how to support and work in a community of people. And that especially is relevant having been here for so long. Along the way, I was really fortunate to have an opportunity to get into mentoring. And this was a little bit earlier in my career. And I'm so thankful to John Basher, who was a gentleman in CS who was involved with outreach. And he had connected with Kennedy High School and their Information Technology Academy and had found a young man named Jose who was just a rock star at Kennedy High School and was top of the class in the academy, and asked me to consider if I had an opportunity to give Jose a chance to work here and develop his skills. So I did hire Jose, and he worked with me for 5 years. And it was a really rewarding experience. It was the first time I had kind of had the responsibility of helping to shape someone else's career. And I kind of thought back to the lessons I learned from William Harris, who did the same for me. And Jose had a great time here. He finished his degree at San Francisco State in electrical engineering. And he ended up moving into a different role here at the lab in NERSC and then on to JGI. And he's currently working for the city of, or county of Santa Clara doing project management, which was an interest that he developed over time and wanted to pursue. And he's really happy with it. But I'm honored that I got a chance to kind of help be an advocate for him and to guide his path through the lab and up and out. So that led me to the next evolution, which is to think about service, which is not something I naturally gravitate towards. And I have to credit my wife for helping me recognize the value and how rewarding it is to be of service, especially despite my natural tendency not to gravitate in that direction. So I've held various service roles, and many of which I still do hold here at the lab. And I wanted to actually, let me back up for a second and say that in 2016, I had an opportunity to help start the AAERG. And I want to thank Latanja Wright, who grabbed me and kind of twisted my arm into this. And she, told me what the idea was to get the ERG up and running. And it occurred to me that somebody has to do this. If I don't step up, there may not be someone else who does it. And, it's a big lift to get a new organization up and running and to think about helping make some organizational change. And so I really appreciate Latanja giving that chance and thinking enough of me to reach out to me and include me in the process. And here we are several years later with the ERG in full swing, and I'm really honored to be a part of starting it. So as I've moved through different service roles, some of them have been voluntary, some of them have been strongly encouraged. And I want to give credit to my current boss, Helen Cadamatori, for talking to me about this in the context of expanding my scope and having a broader impact. Her advice was to think about, not just what I'm doing for the area that I work in or for the divisions that I support, but what can I do for the lab, and how can I be a resource and an asset to the lab in a broader sense. So he encouraged me to serve on some committees that I hadn't thought about, and then there were some that have a natural alignment with the work that I do professionally, such as the Readiness and Resilience Working Group, which was part of the lab's effort to coordinate our response to various disasters, but specifically when we went through the power safety, public safety power shutdowns from PG&E when we had the wildfires. So that was a great opportunity to take some of what I had done in planning with my own group, managing our servers and responding to these kind of outages, and to share and collaborate with other divisions at the lab and help everybody kind of get into a better position to respond to emergencies and disasters. So I want to talk a little bit about what keeps me here, because I know it's not typical for someone to be in the same job for over 25 years. And I've found it really rewarding to be here. I feel invested in the lab, and I feel like the lab is, I couldn't imagine a better place to work. The values that the lab espouses are ones that I really think are important, and I don't think they're necessarily universal. But the other thing is that I feel like our management and leadership actually reflects those values. And for example, supporting the ERGs, all of the ERGs at the lab, employee resource groups, are supported and sponsored by lab management. And the point of that is they want to show that they're engaged and literally do support the ERGs. There's financial support. We meet with lab management to talk about the plans and the progress of the ERGs. And I think that's really amazing. Excuse me. The COVID response was another one that I thought, wow, I'm so glad to be working here at a place that takes a rational and considered approach to how to deal with a really tough situation. And I heard from a lot of friends about different experiences that they had with their organizations during COVID. And I'm, again, really impressed with our leadership and how they have handled this. Also, spirit of collaboration and team science, and that's not just something that people say. It's actually strongly encouraged from the way that cybersecurity happens here, so that things are not just locked down, but they're purposely open because they want to make it easy for science and easy for collaboration. And also just the helpfulness of coworkers and colleagues that I've always experienced and seen good evidence of throughout my career. And I feel like the lab is a great place to have opportunity. I've always been encouraged, as you saw, I've been through several roles here, and I've always been encouraged to move from one role to another. In fact, my first change, it was not even architected by me. It was a plan that William Harris and Keith Fitzgerald put together without even me knowing it, because they had intended me to move forward. And so I think that's a huge thing. I don't ever feel like I'm trapped in a job here. And the culture of the lab, I really like the environment here, the fact that it's pretty laid back and yet serious and professional at the same time. And I've seen that change over time. The lab has had to become a little bit more structured in some things, a little bit less relaxed about things like security and access to the site. And that's a natural consequence of the changing times that we're in. But I feel like we still maintain an environment where people are relaxed and friendly and comfortable and find it easy to work with others and connect. And then my coworkers, I've been really, really lucky to have worked with a set of outstanding people over the years, and that's not something that everyone can say at every job. So that's one of the reasons that I've remained here. So I've tried to learn a few things along the way and thought I would talk about those. And it's kind of been a back to basics experience as I thought about, what I wanted to say here. Nothing groundbreaking, but I think these have been important lessons. And the biggest one is to listen. And I've gotten a lot of feedback over the time, gotten a lot of advice, and I've recognized that that's been given to me with the intent to help me grow and help me improve. And I make a point to try to listen to that and to actually incorporate it and make changes based on it. And then to look, not just to kind of see what's around me, but to look and have a directionality to looking so that I'm focusing on what supports my goals and not just kind of cruising forward on autopilot. I think it's really important to kind of have a purposeful direction. And learning has been a big part of my job. I didn't come here knowing everything, and if I had, I don't know that I would have enjoyed the job so much, because it's the challenges that kind of provoke my growth. And I think that's generally a universal thing. And also, not everything is figured out. I might have to be the one that figures out how to do a given thing. And I really enjoy that. Part of why I got into technology is to solve problems. And to be patient. When I was laid off, I was pretty dismayed by that, and was focusing on how I felt at the time, and I needed to remember to look forward and to plan forward and not get stuck on the disappointment and frustration I had at that moment. Communication is a natural lesson that a lot of people would say is not particularly unique, but I think it's worth calling out because it is fundamental to working with people. And some people I've worked with have not been fans of communication, and it's harder to work with them. And so I really made a point to communicate in writing, to go and meet with people, and to have as much transparency as I can have. And transparency is challenging because it sometimes means telling people that I haven't been able to do what they wanted, or that I won't be able to get to their request when they would like. But I then take that as a chance to work with them and figure out how I can resolve their problem in a way that works for both of us. And I like to think that by being open and upfront, it helps develop some trust that I will help them and I will solve their problem, even if I can't at the moment. So one of the biggest lessons I think I've learned is how important planning is, because uncertainty happens. There's nothing you can do to prevent change, but you can control change, and you can have a framework in mind that can at least adapt and respond to change. And one of the huge things about planning that I find important is that it allows you to focus on the doing when you're in the phase of execution, instead of having to figure it out as you go along, which is distracting and not particularly efficient. And so by taking the time to plan in advance, I find that my group is able to be much more productive and have better success. So one of the challenges I had in the beginning of my career, and I'm still working on, is to embrace ambiguity. That's always been something that I really resisted and was frustrated by, and I realized I was making it into my own kryptonite. I would have a situation where I was given some direction that didn't have as much specifics as I would have liked, and I would be unhappy about that. And instead, I've learned that, in fact, that gives me some room to maneuver, and I can use it to my advantage to make decisions and to progress, even if it's not in a way that I've been told to do, but rather maybe in a way that I need to discover and develop. And so that's been a good lesson, is to not get stuck by something you think is a challenge, but rather to maybe change the way you look at it and see if you can work around it. But the bottom line and the biggest lesson that I've learned is that it isn't about me. I'm here, contributing what I can, but my success is kind of a byproduct now of what I've been doing to empower others and to improve the organization. And that's kind of my next adventure, is to, as I mentioned earlier, my boss has encouraged me to expand my scope, not just around the lab, but also I think strategically in how I look at myself as an asset to the lab. I want to be able to give back, not just in terms of service, but also in terms of helping develop other people. And eventually when I leave, those who will come behind me, I want to leave a solid foundation for them to build on. And so that's kind of what's next for me, is to figure out how to best amplify my value and leave a legacy that I can hopefully be proud of. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and listen to me speak. And I think now we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, James, thank you so much for that talk. It was very interesting, and we've learned a little bit more about you. So I have a question here. Is there any other advice you would give to upcoming IT professionals or others who are hoping to excel in their careers?
Actually, yes, and maybe it's a lesson I didn't focus on in the talk, but remember that you're interacting with human beings. And I say that because a lot of us, I have a lot of friends who are in IT and obviously work with a fair amount of people. It's easy to focus on the systems and the computers and the technology, and that's a lot of fun and it's what we're supposed to do. But specifically in this field, a critical component and one that I think is a rare talent that people have is to also interact with people and consider their humanity and their feelings and their experience, not just the technology they're trying to use. Because a lot of times they will come to us for support, for example, when they have a lot of anxiety and stress because something they depend on isn't working. And it's important not to just focus on just, okay, well, I'm going to solve this problem for you, but to give them a moment to express themselves and to reassure them that we're going to find a solution. So remember to be human and to not only focus on the technology.
That's excellent advice. That's very good. So the next question is, who has had the greatest impact on shaping your career?
So I would say actually that would be my father, because he's the one who gave me the drive to succeed. And he's the one who inspired me to overcome any obstacle. He used to say, you're going to have to work twice as hard as other people because of the color of your skin. And he looked at that not as a, a warning so much as a, hey, get ready and double down because you're going to have to work now. And it might not be as easy as you think. And I've always kept that with me, and it's really been something that's kind of helped me keep going when things have been hard. And so I would say my father has been my biggest influence.
That's good. My father was in the Air Force as well. So I know the kind of upbringing you may have had. I got a
Mm-hmm.
lot of my organizational skills from my father as well.
Mm-hmm.
Question number 3 says, as you've been developing your career, who did you gravitate to for support and to remind you of your capabilities?
So I would say actually my coworkers, and it has been different ones over time, but I've gotten to be friends with several of my coworkers, and sometimes you gripe to your coworkers and complain about things that are tough. And I remember doing that one time, and my friend said, well, I guess you're going to have to figure out how to do that. I was complaining that something wasn't particularly in my wheelhouse, and he said, well, I guess that's your job now, is to put that in your wheelhouse and become good at it. And that was kind of a reminder to not feel sorry for myself that I got this assignment that I didn't feel like was relevant or applicable to me, but rather, okay, take it and go. And that's one of many examples. I've always had really good support from all of my coworkers here, and I know that's also not universal, and I really appreciate that about being here.
Yeah, I really like all of my coworkers too. You can learn a lot from all of them. And so I've learned some pretty good things in the 18 years that I've been here at the lab. Do we have any questions in the chat? Let's see. Is anybody asking any questions? You guys, let's put a question in there for me to ask James. What has been the most difficult challenge in your career and how did you overcome it?
So I'd say that was being laid off. That was a bit of a gut punch. It was not particularly expected, and it was something that was kind of caused me to do some soul searching and to again think back to my dad's lessons about resilience. I mentioned he was laid off 3 times in his career, and excuse me, unfortunately, he was passed on by the time I got laid off, so I couldn't really talk to him about it, but I could reflect on how he handled it. He put his head down, he found other opportunities, and he moved forward. He eventually always did return back to flying, though, because that was his love. But when he got laid off, he found other jobs, and made things work in the interim. And so that that was the hardest thing I faced, and I knew I wanted to continue to be at the lab, and yet I thought my dream job at the time. I might have mentioned that one of my coworkers said, "Hey, look at this as an opportunity, and hey, if you still want to be at the lab, find something new and find something different to do, and maybe one day I'll look back at this and be glad that it happened." And while I would never wish for anyone to be laid off, I will say that I'm in a place now where I would not have expected to be, and I have new and exciting challenges in this job, and I'm ultimately quite happy with the change. Just didn't like how it was forced on me. But it made me grow, and it made me recognize that I can't sit and feel sorry for myself. I have to push forward and make my path.
Yeah, layoffs are pretty hard on everyone that has to live through something like that. I got great advice from my father again too in relationship to layoffs. You know, we couldn't sit around during summer. We always had to work. And when I got laid off, that's what I did. I got up every day and pretended I was going to work. I did what I had to do until I got one. So, do we have any questions in the chat? Okay, here's a question. How do you compare your industry experience with your lab experience?
So um, I'll happily say that I'm not so old that I have both. Some of that's, again, having been here for more than 25 years, but actually came from academia. I went to school at UC Davis, and while I was there, I started working in their IT division as a student and was invited to join as full-time staff not too long after that. So I didn't actually have industry experience, but that brings up a good point I wanted to make, speaking about, how much I appreciate being here. It's easy to take some of the things for granted about being here, the friendly people, the really nice culture, laid back attitude, and yeah, even the professionalism. But when new people come to the lab, that kind of breathes in some new perspective. And I recently had a new member join my group and have been talking to him about how his experiences have been outside in industry. And of course, I have friends in industry too. And I have to say that it makes me even happier to be here to hear stories about how things are in industry and recognize how lucky we all are here to have this institution have its values and its culture. So
That's a good
unfortunately, I don't
answer.
have industry experience to really call upon, but from what I've heard, I continue to be happy that I'm here.
That's a good answer, James. I have another question for you. As one
Mhm.
of the founding members of the AAERG, what are some things that you look forward to for the future of the ERG?
So one of the things that most interested me when Latanja proposed, that I join and help found the organization was helping the lab better embody its values. And I know that the lab has, for example, a value of diversity. And I think that we've had some amazing work done in the time since, in fact, we started the AERG. And I really appreciate all the strides we've made. But at the time, what occurred to me was I didn't see a connection between a hiring process and how do we implement the value of diversity and inclusion and equity. And a component of that is outreach, but it's also the mechanics of the process. Because I had the opportunity to hire a couple of people, and there was no point in the past where I was asked, "Hey, have you considered diversity here?" At one time, I was asked by my supervisor, "Hey, I want to make sure that you're thinking about diversity as you recruit people," and that was great. But it wasn't something that was built into the lab's process. It was just the foresight and consideration of that supervisor who reminded me of that. But I wanted to, and I hope to, help the lab integrate things like considerations of diversity into more of its processes, so that it doesn't depend on someone remembering to think about it. And so actually, that was kind of my initial focus when I joined AARG, and I look forward to helping us continue along that path and kind of deliver on some of the foundations that we established the organization on.
Okay. Another question from the chat says, you mentioned the importance of service. How do you balance your service work with your IT work?
That's a tough one, and it's you don't always have to balance it. I mean, they both have to be done, And sometimes I have to give more in the areas of service. Sometimes I have to step away. And in fact, on that note, I had to step away from the AAERG for a few years when our group was a little bit lean and we were a little bit overwhelmed. And I did have to kind of step back. And I guess that is creating a balance. I wish I could have maintained engagement in both, but I couldn't. And so I did have to back off a little bit. But, not too long ago, I was encouraged to rejoin the AAERG, and I'm just going to make a point of carving out time to participate and to be a part of it, and as well as the other service roles that I inhabit. And I think it's a question of recognizing that they are a valid use of time. They're part of the job, even though they're not necessarily in the job description or on paper. They're part of what makes the lab function and function well. One of the current groups I'm working in is the future of performance management. And I think everybody has some thoughts on the process. And, so then lab management said, hey, we want to improve the process, but we need you, the community, to be involved. And so I'm really happy to, have a chance to help out with that. So it's a tough thing to juggle both. There's not always a nice balance, and sometimes there are sacrifices. But it's a worthwhile thing to do, and it came down to me. I have to do it because someone else may not, and these things have to happen.
Okay, that's a good answer. I think everybody ought to get involved in service work. It helps with their regular work as well. It helps you work through some things. You
In
mentioned,
fact, as I mentioned earlier,
go ahead.
there's some synergy sometimes. Some of the planning and preparation that I'm involved in kind of the broader sense dovetail really nicely with the kind of operation of my group and managing the systems and services that we provide. So.
Yes. Another question. You mentioned focusing on people. Do you have any recommendations on how to help someone, especially early career, deal with imposter syndrome? That's a good question.
Yeah, and I think the first answer I would give is let's talk about it, because it is something I think so many people feel. I feel it. I still feel it today.
Mhm.
Can't believe I'm, in this role sometimes, but it is something that is almost universal, and it's okay. And I think the way that I've tried to look at it is, they say fake it until you make it. Well, you can also think of that as practice until you're great, and keep practicing. And so you might feel like, oh, I'm not supposed to be, I'm not a such and such. Nobody is born a such and such. And as I mentioned, also, if you come to the job already knowing it, it's probably not going to be a huge challenge. So you may have to be an imposter, and that's how you start to develop and grow and fill out the contours of your actual role. So I'd say just confront it head on, be straightforward about it, talk to other people about it, and you'll probably learn that they too have imposter syndrome. And again, look at it as practice, and you'll get there.
Good answer. There's more questions. You guys are really putting up some really good questions. The next question is, James, you've shared so much wisdom across your career. What do you do for fun?
Well, thank you. So I would say my biggest hobby is being a parent of my daughter Ariana, and that's a rewarding and amazing experience. I couldn't be happier to be part of, and it consumes a lot of my attention and energy because I want to do the best job that I can. I was really lucky to have extremely supporting and loving parents who I think couldn't have done a better job raising my sister and me, and I'm hoping to do the same with my daughter. And so spending time with her is fun for me. Everything we do. In fact, she's recently gotten her driver's license, and there were times when we were practicing that I kind of wasn't thrilled about coming home from work and then stepping in the door and immediately turning out and going driving. I thought it was a chore, and then I recognized, wait a minute, this is a chance to spend time with my daughter. And so we always have a great time together, and she has a lot of fun. We have daddy-daughter dates as often as we can. Also, I love driving sports cars, and I've gotten her into that as a hobby. And so she's eyeing my sports car, and not going to get it, but that's one of the things I really love doing is driving, and also going on hikes with my family. We tend to do that as a way to socialize with friends, and we like to go to different places around the area, go for a hike, and then go out for a nice lunch or something like that. And is a great way also to, involve younger kids.
Mhm.
Ariana is still inclined to go with us, and I hope that'll continue to be the case. But it's a great way for families to get together and have a good time and actually be interactive.
That's good. If she doesn't feel inclined to go with you, don't worry, she will be back.
I hope so.
Question. Hi, James. I'm an intern at LBNL. Any advice on how to stand out as an intern? I would like to work at LBNL in the near future. Any advice on how to branch out and find new mentors as well? There's a couple of questions in there. So take the one about
Yeah, yeah.
standing out as an intern.
So yeah, and I'll pass on the lesson that I got from William Harris, the supervisor who brought me here, and he said, "Hey, I'm putting you out to handle things that you may not have thought were your job, but it's because I want to make sure that you get exposure, that people see you, that people
Mm.
see what you can do." And so I would say focus on making sure you talk to people, that you join any kind of clubs, even if it's not related to work, any kind of employee resource group. If you're interested in one of those, we have several with different focuses at the lab. And again, I'm going to back to remember it's about the people. The opportunities come when people see what you can do and recognize that you might be of value, but you have to make that connection. And again, I didn't even realize that I was making that connection when I interviewed. I didn't expect a call after I didn't get the job, but William Harris had apparently been impressed enough with me that he called me out of the blue after I didn't get the job and brought me here. So if I hadn't had the interview with the 6 different groups on that day, wouldn't have crossed his path. So even a chance encounter, um, you know, meeting someone and talking to them in an employee resource group, common interest, be visible and communicate with people, and ask too. If you're interested in something, say, hey, you guys have any openings in your group, or are there any plans to open a position, and talk about why you are interested in it. And you never know, it might work out.
Yes, there's many opportunities to get involved here at the lab and to work on committees and volunteer for different things. When you
And
say,
take advantage of,
oh, go ahead.
sorry, I wanted to just say, um, take advantage of any structured programs. I'm actually trying to encourage my daughter to look at the K through 12 programs that the lab has for summer internships. Are
Mhm.
amazing, and the lab really does a great job of creating opportunities for people. So do the research and participate and take advantage of those when it's relevant.
Good advice. When you think about diversity, what steps would you recommend to help the lab with this?
That's hard to make a recommendation because I am quite impressed with the lab's emphasis on diversity and equity and inclusion, and I've seen a really impressive mustering of resources to focus on that in the last several years that I've been involved. And I think, like I said, I don't have any concern about this, but I think building all of this into kind of the operational processes and mechanics of the lab is a key thing, because that will start to define the culture and to support the culture as we make those changes. But if we can't have just a culture of diversity, inclusion, and equity, it has to be baked into how we roll, as it were. And so, as I said, that was one of the first areas that I wanted to focus on when I started working with the AARG, is to look at, well, what can we do from a process standpoint, and building this stuff in so that it doesn't have to be that, okay, now we're going to think about diversity and equity, but rather that it's a part of our natural operation.
Okay.
So I will
Last
say I
one.
commend the lab on how it's doing, and I encourage continuing that.
Okay. Last question. In your 25 years, have you seen an increase in the number of women working in the IT area? If not, what needs to be done to change that?
So I would say that I have not necessarily seen an increase, but I've been more aware of them, and especially I've been raising a daughter and trying to think about her future and how to, encourage and prepare her for it. And I would say I'm mindful of, looking for opportunities when I have positions open, encouraging women to apply, and making sure that not only they can apply, but I want to find ways to reach out and encourage them to do so. And like I said, I'm starting with my daughter, and I'm pushing her, and making sure she never feels like, oh, I can't do that because, excuse me. And I think I've been lucky also to have had some amazing women as supervisors or as upper management leaders. And I point to them, to my daughter, and as examples that, hey, there's no ceiling here, and if there is ever one, you just got to break through it. And here are some examples of women who have done that and who are leading. And I talk a lot about my experience working with and for women with my daughter, because I want her to think of that as a normal thing and not think that, oh, well, men are bosses or men are, leaders, but that anyone can be a leader, and that, there's the opportunities are not gender specific.
Good answer. James, you've given us a lot to think about today, and you've passed on some great wisdom for your years that you have here at the lab, and I'm quite sure that many people will benefit. At this point, I am going to turn this back over to Mr. Miles Green.
Well, thank you everyone for coming and listening to me today.